I have seen the comments and the posts. Someone has made Procreate for Windows and it's called Stylus X. Looking at their website, the Procreate vibes are very real. This is available for Windows only. It costs $33.50 here in the US, and I am using the free demo. Not sure how long it lasts. From what I can tell, the demo is fully featured. And it's a first-gen product that works really well. It reminds me of HiPaint for iOS and Android more than Procreate, but HiPaint was considered a Procreate clone too when it first came out, so... But taking a look at the app, we have our settings and things in the upper left-hand corner. Our brushes, erasers, selection tool, color picker, all in the upper right. And the brush size slider and opacity slider over here on the left-hand side. So if you're familiar with Procreate, you are going to be right at home here. Here's the thing I really like about it. It gets a lot of the little things right. For example, if my layers are open or my color picker is open and then I go to start to draw in many apps, once the pen hits the canvas, it closes those windows and it doesn't start drawing when you draw a line. So you have this effect where it's open, you go to start drawing, doesn't draw, and you have to draw again. It is a little thing, but what happens in Procreate is if a brush window is open and then you start drawing, it closes that window and draws at the same time. It's able to handle both of those inputs. It's a tiny little UX thing. It's not a big deal, but it makes using an app like this so much smoother when they get that detail right. And they did. This also doesn't feel like a native Windows app. It launches more like a game than a program, so it goes full screen. No bar at the top, no taskbar along the bottom. And if you've ever used a drawing program on Windows, you know that those tend not to be nearly as responsive as a drawing app on Android or the iPad. If you're in Photoshop or even Clip Studio, pinching and zooming works, but it's just not like super smooth. It doesn't feel totally native. Here, it is super smooth, responsive, just like the iPad or Android. They also have hand gestures here. 2 fingers to pan around, 2 fingers tap to undo, 3 fingers to bring up this little wheel. But this is Windows. What happens if you don't have a touchscreen tablet like this Wacom Moving 13 that I'm using here? Check out this little circle along the bottom in the right-hand corner. It's a neat little feature. So this circle lets you pan around your drawing using the stylus or using your finger, and the little line next to it lets you rotate your drawing using your stylus or finger. Really cool UI ideas here. Took me a minute to figure out how to zoom in and out using this thing, but basically you place your finger on the circle and you move it around the circle kind of like a dial, and it zooms you in and out of your drawing. I did grab my keyboard to just see if some of those types of shortcuts you usually see in drawing apps work, and they didn't. It's basically replacing many of those things with touch gestures the way you do on the iPad. Let's look at some of these tools a little bit closer. Let's start with the brushes, because there are a lot of brushes here with different shapes, textures, and behaviors, and overall it's a really good start, but it's definitely the weak spot of the app compared to like some of the other apps out there in the App Store. First of all, the pencil brushes. There are several here and all of them are just a little bit too light. Actually, they're way too light. If you're pressing lightly with your pencil, it almost barely makes a mark. And I'm not talking about super light sketching. I'm talking about kind of my average light pressure. So to get a light line, you need to apply medium pressure. To get a heavy line, you really have to apply some pressure. I also felt that all of the brushes by default have really aggressive smoothing on them, and that makes them feel kind of synthetic, not organic like real pencils or pens. They all feel a little bit loopy. I like to go in here and crank the smoothness on brushes sometimes, but I don't like that feel on every brush, especially brushes that I'm using for sketching. Now the good news here is you can go into the brush palette, tap on any brush, and go to the settings screen and play with it and try things out. And there's even this large area here, just like Procreate, where you can test the brush as you're modifying. And if you change anything that you regret, there's a little icon that lets you reset it back to kind of like factory default. A lot of these brushes that I felt had too much like correction on them, too much smoothing on them, really were only set to like 4 or 5%. This can be some really aggressive smoothing. I just turned that off for a lot of my brushes. We have an eraser tool and we have a smudge tool, and those work very similar to Procreate, where you can go in and you can use those the same way you would use a brush. Another thing that Procreate popularized that you'll see here is that you can drag out your color from your color picker and drag it across the canvas into an enclosed shape and it will fill it. So this works as like a bucket tool will in Clip Studio or Photoshop or Krita. Now, one thing that did not work the way I expected it to was tap and hold in order to bring up a color picker. At first I thought there was no color picker in this app. It took me a long time to find it, but there's this tiny little button between the brush size slider and the opacity slider over here on the left hand side, where if you tap that, it brings up the color picker. I think an icon to label that would make it way more apparent what that button does. They've also added some of the more advanced features that you find in Procreate. There is no animation that I've found anyway, but there's like a basic grid and a 3D grid tool and even a liquify tool. This app does a really good job of bringing that iPad-like drawing experience to Windows, but it is first-gen software. So I'm gonna go to nitpick land and I'm gonna talk about some of the things that I think can be proved upon here, some of the things you're probably gonna land on and find when you jump into this app. First of all, I want the interface to have more contrast, especially when I'm looking at these sliders over here on the left-hand side. This changes my brush opacity and my brush size. They're very, very, very dark gray and they blend in too much with the background. It's hard to see exactly where that slider is, especially if I'm not wearing my glasses. Another nitpick, and was probably the thing that drove me the most nuts while I was using this, is that the interface blows up to full screen. Now, when it is in full screen, you cannot move it from one screen to another. And if you think about how you use something like this on Windows, I have my drawing tablet plugged in as my second monitor, not my primary monitor. At least that's the way I work. But no matter where you try to open this up, it's always going to open up on your primary monitor, which I can't really draw on. So every time I wanted to use it, I had to go into Windows settings. I had to change it around so that my second monitor, my drawing tablet, became my primary monitor. And then I opened up the app. And of course, every time I went to open the app, I totally forgot that I needed to do that. Before you jump into the drawing view, there's this gallery view, just like Procreate, where you see all of the drawings that you've created. Many of the icons on this screen in particular don't make a ton of sense. The main one does, like this big plus button means create a new canvas. I figured that out right away. But I was trying to import a file. Guess which one of these imports? It's this arrow with this little loopy line underneath it. And just looking at these offhand, I've already forgotten what these do. I have to tap them to remember. The other thing that I think they really need to add to this program is the ability to open up layered Photoshop files. This is kind of the universal layered art file nowadays, even if you're working in Procreate or you're working in Fresco or something like that. Usually those are exported as PSDs, and then you could open them up in Clip Studio, you could open them up in Procreate, you can open them up anywhere. Here, you're kind of stuck with the file type that you've got. You can't export as a PSD. Correction, I just found it. Yes, you can, but it cannot open PSDs. So that's really the end of my nitpicks. There is other drawing software out there if you're interested in this kind of performance on Windows. There were three that came to mind. The first is Fresco. This is Adobe's version of Procreate that originally came out for the iPad and has since come to the desktop. Now, Fresco originally had a free version that didn't have quite as many features and a paid version that was part of the larger Adobe software suite that you had to pay monthly for. But last year, or maybe it was the year before at this point, Fresco went completely free. Now, that's great news if you like free software, which I do. I think it's great free software. The downside of Fresco is how long will it remain free? Adobe could change their mind at any day and lock you out of all your drawings and illustrations. I guess what I'm saying here is even though it's great and it's free, back up your stuff. Then there's an app called Leonardo, which I haven't used in a long time. I should go back and check that out sometime, but that's another one that's really responsive. It looks more like a traditional drawing app, but it is more responsive on the desktop when you're pinching to zoom and doing that sort of thing. And the last one that comes to mind is an app called Sketchable. And that was one I talked about a lot back in the day when I was reviewing the Surface Pro tablets, because it was the only Windows app that was really responsive to pinching and zooming and hand gestures and that sort of thing. I don't care for the brushes in that quite as much. I don't care for the way it's laid out quite as much. It's not bad. It's just I'm familiar with other things. And these kind of Fresco or an app like this just fits better how I draw. But what do you think? Have you had the chance to check out Stylus X yet? Do you think it's too much like Procreate? Let me know down below in the comments. Thank you all for watching, and I'll talk to you in a couple of days.